Hi, AP English 12. I have several goals in this video. I am going to introduce the second AP exam essay, which asks you to analyze a prose passage, give you some general strategies for responding to those kinds of prompts. We're then going to look at the actual prompt that you will be responding to today. And then based on what it's asking you to do, I will be giving you some specific strategies for looking at narrative, voice, and attitude. And then I'll walk you through what you are going to do in response to that prompt. So the main thing I want to convey to you in talking about how to analyze prose passages is that all of the skills that we have been building this whole year in analyzing poetry are going to help you analyze prose. There are some important distinctions for you to keep in mind, and the top part of this document shows you or just reminds you of some of the different terms that we've really focused on in our discussion of poetry, and then some of the terms and literary elements that you will see in prompts asking you to analyze prose. So some of these relate to things that we've talked about in poetry. Some of them we have not been focusing on, like dialogue, narrative, pacing, characterization, but they're things that I know you're familiar with from your previous study of literature. The next thing that I want to offer to you as a tool is an adaptation of the poetry process questions that can help you analyze a prose passage. Now, this is not a checklist that you need to go through in order, and I would strongly urge you to let the prompt guide you to which of these areas you are going to focus on. But this walks you through some of the different things you may look for in trying to quickly read, understand, get a sense of what's going on in a prose passage. This one is probably least important. You will certainly see on the prompt what the passage is from, who the author is. You may not be familiar with that. In this case, you may know Nathaniel Hawthorne as the author of The Scarlet Letter, so you may have an idea of the kind of literature that he writes, but this may not be helpful to you, and that's fine. More important is for you to pay attention to the different speakers in the passage, especially the narrator, so that will be important for what we're doing today. Is the narrator a character, which he is in this case, in this prompt, or you may have passages where there's an omniscient narrator, and you will know that because the narrator isn't participating in the dialogue and probably isn't using the word I and seems to have access to the internal thoughts of multiple characters. In dialogue, you want to make sure you know which characters are speaking. In terms of word choice, look for tone. Level of diction may be helpful in showing you the differing levels of status or education between characters, but again, that may not be a main feature of the passage. Then some of the different things that detail will help you envision as you read the passage. In terms of arrangement, you won't have stanza breaks, but look for distinct parts. Are there clear shifts within the passage? And then are there notable areas where you see the pacing change, places where it speeds up, and I think most importantly, places where the narrative really slows down and zooms in on a character or a moment. In terms of connections, you want to think about relationships, and you want to think about where there are tensions or complexity in those relationships. And we'll circle back to that in some later prompts. So let's take a look at this prompt. So it is an interchange between two characters, and the main thing that we need to take away from the little bit of context in this prompt is that these two characters have been living together in this sort of utopian rural community, and they're about to part ways. So there is this history of shared experience, but they're moving towards this parting of ways, which may indicate, right, some change in belief, some change in their relationship. Then here is the actual prompt. You are analyzing how Hawthorne, the author, portrays the narrator's attitude towards Zenobia. This is the character that the narrator is talking to. And great news, the first sentence gives you a clue. Her manner bewildered me. So we know that this is not going to be a crystal clear, straightforward interaction between these two characters. We know that there is going to be some tension, at least internal tension on the part of the narrator, as he interacts with and thinks about or kind of conveys his impressions of this character. Notice that it just very broadly says through the use of literary techniques. This is the direction that this prompt is moving, so you may not see a list of suggested literary techniques to look for. So that leaves it wide open for you. Okay, so before we talk about what you're going to do, let's think about how we look for narrative, voice, and attitude in general. So Things to look for in this case: narrator's attitude towards a character, which this prompt asks you to explore. You want to think about direct and indirect characterization. I know we haven't touched on those since the beginning of our Frankenstein unit, but I think you are familiar with those. So are there places where the narrator explicitly describes the character? So look for that in here. Are there places where he explicitly describes Zenobia, her appearance, her actions, etc.? And then you may want to consider, are there more indirect methods of characterization? Appearance, actions, speech. How does the narrator describe his or her own reactions to the character? So where does he stop and tell us his internal monologue as he is processing this conversation? Some general things that you want to ask when you're responding to a prompt about narrative, voice, or attitude are who's the narrator? What do we know about the relationship? In this case, we know that there's some history and there's a parting of the ways happening. What kinds of words does the narrator use? So what kind of tone do those words convey? You want to look for patterns. You want to look for is there a general positive or general negative? If there's conflict or complexity, what are the different kinds of perceptions that we see on the part of the narrator? And then what are the details that the narrator includes? And I would encourage you to notice and annotate what are the details that stand out to you. So as the character is describing, or as the narrator is describing the character, what are some of the striking details that he uses? Again, looking for places where the narrative slows down to focus on something that may be important. The narrator wants to draw our attention to that, or the narrator may step out of the action to give us his thoughts and his reactions. And then, of course, looking for a shift. Is there a change from the beginning to the end of the passage, and what causes that? So again, taking a quick look at this passage, we start with bewilderment, and we end with kind of a statement of an experiment succeeding. We end with the narrator seeming a little bit more definite in his perceptions. So what gives him this sense of clarity about Zenobia's actions or about her character? Okay. A couple final reminders before we look at what you're actually going to do. And I will reiterate this as we look at this, but I want to say to you that it's most important for you to be able to make a statement in your thesis about the narrator's attitude towards Zenobia. It is not important for you to give me a list of literary techniques. So, for example, don't say, the narrator uses word choice, selection of detail, and tone to convey the narrator's attitude. Instead, do say, if you are talking about those things, make sure that you say what kinds of words, what kinds of detail, what kind of tone. But really, the most important thing is to be able to come to a clear statement of what the narrator's attitude is. And then you're going to talk through, if you were writing the essay, you're going to talk through how we know this. So you are not writing an essay. Great news. What you're going to do is simply respond to this prompt with a thesis and then 2 pieces of evidence and your commentary on those pieces of evidence. So this is a very kind of rough outline of how you would respond to this prompt if you were writing a full essay. If you want additional practice, you are certainly welcome to write a full essay, but I am not requiring all of you to do that. So again, your thesis needs to clearly describe or identify the narrator's attitude towards Zenobia. You will not get the thesis point if you don't identify the narrator's attitude towards Zenobia. And then you are going to find some evidence that supports your interpretation. These would be the parts of the passage that led you to this belief, and then you're going to give some commentary connecting your evidence to your thesis. This is really, I think, an important thing for you to practice so that you can make sure that the commentary you're providing in your actual essays is an analytical statement and not just a rephrasing of the evidence that you're using. In terms of what you can use for evidence, you're welcome to pull in full sentences if those seem super meaningful. You're also welcome to paraphrase to describe kind of an interaction that happens. Again, that needs to be specific, so you would be paraphrasing a particular exchange of dialogue or a particular part of the passage, not broadly summarizing the whole. The other thing that good writers do in essays is they pull out groups of related words and phrases. So maybe you see a theme in the details the author uses, or you see the narrator uses, or maybe you see a theme in the words the narrator uses to describe his own reactions. So you can pull out kind of a bullet point of words and phrases from different parts of the passage and use that as one piece of evidence. What I don't want you to do is give me one word and then one word here. It needs to be a little bit more substantial than that. And then your commentary is going to, again, connect your evidence to the thesis, saying what the evidence reveals about the narrator's attitude and how it reveals that, not just restating or paraphrasing. And then my goal is that you would be able to submit this by the end of class. I do not want this to become homework for you. So I would say give yourself a time limit. Spend some time, spend 10 or 15 minutes reading and making notes on the passage, and then from there formulate your thesis. And I think if your note taking is good, you should be able to then pull from that in finding your evidence and developing your commentary.